in here, hear part of the talk. So yeah, good afternoon. Thanks guys for stopping in. My name is Josette Marrero. I'm with Sonoma Technology. I work as kind of a project manager and air quality scientist, and really the focus of a lot of what I do is working on fence line monitoring as well as community monitoring. And so I wanted to give a talk to you guys a little bit on some of the lessons that we've learned in the few years that we've been doing this, and how really facility engagement and community monitoring can be a positive for everybody involved. Kind of how it builds bridges and trust, and how it can be useful going forward. Okay, so a little bit first about who we are. We are Sonoma Technology. We are fairly small consulting company based in Northern California, San Francisco Bay Area. We have a satellite office also in Southern California. That's where I'm based out of. And we really are a small team, about 75 folks, kind of, you know, covering all facets of really providing end-to-end environmental products. We've got, you know, our scientists, we have our policy and data analysts, we've got engineers, software developers, database developers. We really run the whole gamut. And by end-to-end, I mean we do all facets of like a monitoring program. So we'll set up, you know, we help find out the monitoring, we help develop a monitoring plan. We pick instrumentation, we install instrumentation, we operate and maintain. We'll do data management, and, you know, we develop websites. We have our own data management system that we develop in-house as well to help disseminate all that information as well. And we'll do data analysis and modeling, you know, GIS, anything that is required for various clients. So today I want to talk a little bit about kind of, you know, the push that has recently been happening with kind of more community-focused monitoring, some of the legislation that's come through recently, obviously. You know, where does that leave industrial facilities? You know, if you're being told you have to do community monitoring program, really what are the best, you know, key components to be able to get that done effectively and efficiently? And in so doing, what are the benefits that industry can gain? And like I said, I'm going to give a couple case studies and lessons learned from the last few years of monitoring. So again, a little bit of background on why community-focused monitoring. So obviously we know that in the public, people are fully aware of, you know, what they're being exposed to, and the fact that even at low levels, you know, air pollution can really have a big impact on human health. Communities at fence lines, industry fence lines in particular, are really worried about, you know, the exposure that they are potentially experiencing, not only from just kind of constantly being near a refinery, but in periodic upset events, right? Like, we've heard of refinery explosions and other things like that are really driving the community interest. You know, they're just not passively sitting by. There's a lot more information that they want to know. They want transparency. They just want to know as much as possible. What is the facility doing? What is their potential exposure? And that's really even in the face of what we see regionally a lot of the times from, you know, kind of government sites, is that overall concentrations still seem to be going in the right direction. They're increasing, but there's still a need for more information. And obviously a lot of things are driven by social causes, right? You know, this concept of environmental justice is really not new. I think the EPA established a National Environmental Justice Council in like 1992, but really in the last, you know, 5 to 10 years, it's really picking up as a social cause. And you could even say in the last year, it's gotten even more attention with a lot of the other things that are happening in this country and, you know, the administration that we're in. And so, you know, you get a lot of these community advocacy groups that are seeking out, you know, how do they get their air monitoring? They're not just relying on legislation. You know, the way they look at facilities, it's a little bit hostile. They look at these places and they think there's a lack of accountability, and, you know, this leads to hostile interactions. There's no trust. Litigation comes into place and all those things. And so I understand it's a difficult thing to navigate. And it's something that's really probably going to be coming up a lot more as you know, the next few years, as we see even more legislation kind of roll out. You know, these advocacy groups, like I said, are relying on, they're trying to get funding in any way to try to be able to do some of their monitoring, right? So there's a lot of foundations that, you know, people have money, they want to, you know, give to these communities, and so there's a lot more monitoring that is happening out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about like what that means for the quality of the data, and I think that's a really key part of this. Again, we know that governments at all levels are really starting to not only consider, you know, monitoring in these what they'll call overburdened communities, or either underserved, you know, any kind of what we call these environmental justice communities. the legislation is really starting to happen and really take off. At the federal level, in the last year, we've seen an administration change, and now really there is a large, push to get as much modern, to push more of this information for communities that they consider to be in these, overburdened areas. And that's going to span agencies and departments and all kinds of, facets of government. And so those are going to include things more like mandating fence line monitoring. I think we've heard the president say that out loud in different events and stuff like that. It's really a big push, spanning not just monitoring, but like data visualization, like where can people access these things? We have these tools like EJ Screen that EPA developed, and I think you're going to see that take off more and get pushed. And that's just a mapping tool that, kind of highlights where these communities are that are in close proximity to facilities and really kind of puts a image to some of what people are calling these environmental justice regions. There's obviously kind of more litigation that they're pushing for as, looking to establish an environmental and climate justice division. So there's a lot of big push from the federal level that's, I think, is going to drive a lot of states and a lot of industrial facilities in particular to happen. Again, we know many of the states are enacting regulations as well to kind of assess the environmental impacts, not just on everybody, but on these specific communities that we're calling these underserved communities. It's also happening even at the local level. Individual air, agencies or environmental agencies are establishing rules and programs. I've seen cities kind of push for different, environmental monitoring or air monitoring programs as well. And so I think this is really the big push going forward. So I just wanted to give a couple examples of some of what we've seen and what I think is kind of, coming down the pipeline. There's an example like in the state of New Jersey. This was passed last year, a law that's, sets up the Department of Environmental Protection there to identify what they're calling overburdened communities. And I guess to give a little bit more of a definition, we're talking, some of that is really more socioeconomic definition as well, right? You're talking your low income neighborhoods, those where English is not the first language, where there's low education attainment as well. All of those are included in overburdened. And so what this regulation is doing is saying, well, if an industrial facility wants to have a permit or renew their permit, they're going to have to go out of the way to show that their activities, their emissions are not disproportionately impacting those same communities. And so this is the map kind of showing where those are throughout the state of New Jersey. And so that it covers a wide range of facilities. And I think the language on this legislation is kind of still being worked through as far as I can tell. But what they deem large, major pollution sources, any kind of industrial facilities, incinerators, water treatment plants, waste treatment, scrap metal and landfills. So I think, seeing this trend, what is that going to mean for even more legislation coming down the pipeline? Are there individual rules that are going to be coming out of this state as well? Like I said, we're a California-based company. California tends to lead the way in regulation for good or bad, they've really gone in as well on this concept of community-focused monitoring. How do we get to these environmental justice communities, as they're calling them, and give the people the information that they need? And so, just a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, they passed the Assembly Bill 617. Which is really aimed at kind of looking, evaluating and reducing, exposure to criteria pollutants and air toxics in these same disproportionately impacted communities. So, that was kind of a multifaceted program, included kind of the first step was identifying what these priority communities are, like where do we need to target, formation of committees to kind of understand what the overall approach is going to be. Developing community air monitoring programs in each of these locations, and really ultimately is trying to develop and implement, how do we come up with reduction plans for the area. So that's kind of a big driver in the state of California as well. The first go around, they came up with these and I guess I should point out that these priority communities were not just developed, with the knowledge that the air districts have based on measurements, but also an individual community could have nominated themselves to be considered part of this. And so using that information, the state came up with like where the priority regions are. As you can see, it covers like pretty much where the populations live in California. It's pretty vast area, but you've got obviously your kind of urban centers, San Francisco Bay Area, your LA Basin, San Diego. But also it's pushing at communities that tend to be like what I was talking about, the socioeconomic background, the border areas like Imperial County, which is known for having high pollution, not just based on things that are happening locally, but also being so close to the border. Environmental regulations are a little bit more relaxed in Mexico. The impacts are probably a little bit different. And so we're STI in general, we're getting to do some monitoring in Imperial Valley as well, based on some of the AB 617 findings. And then obviously this also includes kind of the Central Valley areas where there's a lot of agricultural practices that have obviously impacted the air. We know this is San Joaquin Valley is home to some of the worst air pollution in America. Some of the top 10 locations are all kind of contained in the San Joaquin Valley, combination of refineries, agriculture. The topography of the region makes it pretty prone to air quality as well. If you've ever been out in the Central Valley in the middle of like February, you can't see like anything because there's so much, fog from the area, but that's mixed in with some of the pollution as well. It's actually a pretty nasty combination. So the AB 617 also included this like air grants program where they were putting, logistical technical help out there for these community groups to learn more about their air and to be able to monitor it. So there's lots of work that's happening right now with AB 617. Obviously, we're here to talk a lot about industrial folks or industrial processes. The biggest thing in the last few years have been the state regulations like AB 1647 that are focused on petroleum refineries, right? So the law gets passed and it says that refineries have to develop and maintain fenceline monitoring programs. These are made up of obviously measurements that are being done via open path and point analyzers. If anybody heard Brian's talk yesterday, he did a great overview of kind of the technology that they're offering. We're here this week talking about the technology that we use. It's a combination of lots of different types of analyzers that can be done to meet these requirements. The biggest thing is that these requirements, the data had to be done in real time. So normally, these are passive samplings that you can use for benzene, which takes months to get the data. Now we're talking real time, and real time in this concept is generally about 10, 15 minutes within collecting the data point. It's displayed on a public website that can be accessible by anybody. And so I think we're down to about within 10 minutes, our data, after going through some kind of quick QC, winds up on a public website. So it's out there for everybody. Each region or air district in the state of California has kind of put their own flavor, their own spin on the state law. Rule 1215 in the Bay Area actually came out just before 1647. So, they thought about this a lot, and then it kind of happened on the statewide scale. In the LA Basin, Southwest AQMD passed Rule 1180. Again, kind of almost being developed in parallel to the overall state assembly bill. And more recently, in the last, I think, about 2 years, the San Joaquin Valley has the Air Pollution Control District that passed their equivalent version of the rule, which is 4465. So all of these have very much similar components. You have to get a fenceline monitoring system out there. It has to be continuous, has to be near real time. All the information needs to be out there. Southwest AQMD was kind of the first one to add a little bit of a different spin compared to what Bay Area did, which says, not only do you have to put that information out there and it has to be listed within like health context, the public needs to be notified or be able to be notified when a certain health threshold is crossed. So these are usually based on like an acute 1 hour average concentration of the different gases. And so in the state of California, what we've really used is what's called the reference exposure level, REL. It's something that's defined kind of by the California OEHA, it's the Office of Exposure and Health Hazard Assessment. So we've used those concentrations as kind of our basis for, it's kind of an opt-in system. I think we heard a little bit more about kind of the Colorado laws, maybe changing that to be something that's mandatory. But in California, it's an opt-in system. If you're a resident in an area, you can go onto the website, sign up for notifications, and you get it through like an email or a text message system. And so again, that's kind of tricky. It's got its own set of problems because if you're putting the data out there in real time, maybe you don't have enough time to catch, something that was a known incident, you get false positives, it can be a tricky situation. And again, with up to 20 different compounds being reported, depending on your facility, there's possibility for many notifications coming through at a given facility. And I will say, South Coast AQMD has probably got, it's definitely like the longest list of compounds right now, with 20 pretty much being required of all facilities. For comparison, the Bay Area is about up to 10 compounds, and really that depends on what the kind of emission sources are that are known within the refinery. So it can be dropped down a little bit more from the 10 to about 6 or 7. And I think San Joaquin is kind of the same way. They're not necessarily pushing it everywhere. So you don't need to necessarily do all 20. I think at least some of the facilities I know of in like the Bakersfield area are maybe only reporting 6 compounds as well, something like that, much smaller. SDI really has been doing quite a bit of this over the last few years. So far we have either helped implement and do the operation and maintenance, or are just kind of doing kind of the operation and maintenance of fence line monitoring systems in about 7 different facilities in California right now. So again, all these, refineries just went live with these data in the last year and a half, and we've really helped kind of put together about 7 different refineries fence line monitoring systems. We operate like 120 analyzers, whether they're open path or point again. And we're doing, all of the public data display, data management, and the notification systems where they're applicable. So we're deep in it right now. Just a schematic of our fence line monitoring system. If you want to hear a little bit more, we've got a booth out there with one of our systems, and we'd love to tell you more about it. Again, the nice advantage of the open path monitors, and why I think that legislation has gone that way, you just cover a much bigger distance than you're going to be able to do with a point monitor. A typical path length is probably somewhere between 300 to 700 meters. So you figure you can put a lot of those around a facility and you quickly cover that perimeter. So I just wanted to show you a couple of examples for those who maybe want a visual display of what this is. You can see the analyzers here, but what does it mean when you're integrating this system, at a refinery? Some of the, not to scare folks, industry folks, but, to be able to implement this fence line monitoring system, it actually takes quite a bit of design effort, quite a bit of construction. That's kind of some of the biggest, the biggest drivers of cost in these monitoring networks. Got a big shelter inside of it. You can see you've got your open path analyzers. You've probably got some point analyzers all contained in there as well. We've also, do some visibility measurements as well. Open path, I described briefly, you obviously, they work best when it's a nice sunny day outside. They're not exactly, bad weather instruments. If you've got any kind of fog or rain in the air, you can really impact your measurements. So we need to do visibility everywhere, helps quality control. And in addition to the fence line, there's also, community monitoring that we do nearby as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Torrance Air project in a second that we work on, but, it's a combination of doing some of the fence line monitoring while also doing community monitoring. And so we have trailers like this set up where we have some point analyzers to do, benzene, toluene, H2S, HF, black carbon, and our wind measurements all for context, meteorological context. So just to give you guys an idea of what we do when we say we're, installing a system. And we work with refiners to help design all this stuff as well. So where does the industry fit into this? And so, it's clear, like I said, this trend towards more regulations is going to keep going. The push for focusing on environmental justice regions, these overburdened communities, is going to continue to happen. And I understand that regulation is certainly the main driver for industrial facilities to establish area monitoring networks. But I think what we've learned in the last few years is that there's really benefits to a facility being really engaged in that, and maybe not necessarily being, I don't want to do it, these dumb regulations. I understand that can be thought, or dealing with communities that are known to be, a little bit hostile. It's like, to use a cliche adage, it's like, oh, the best defense is a good offense, right? So you want to get out ahead. You don't want to just be a passive person who's got regulation happening to you. You want to be engaged in it and make sure you're getting out ahead of this, because I really do think it could be a good thing for everybody. And some of the highlights I'll just mention real quick, obviously, what you want to do is be able to have good quality data that you believe in. That's something that refineries or some kind of industry is in a position to help do, because you have just access to other resources. It helps provide that transparency that I said is so important to a lot of community members and what they're seeking right now. And then you can work towards building and repairing trust in different communities. Obviously, some communities may continue to be hostile no matter what, but this is like definitely a foot in the right direction. So you want to show engagement in it and not just, like I said, kind of being passive. And so there's really a varied approach to how community monitoring is done, or community focused monitoring. It's not necessarily happening in the community, but the approach really depends on what resources are available. So we've seen situations where community focused monitoring maybe does have access to regulatory grade monitors, but they're also using a combination of networks that involve low cost sensors. We've seen situations where you've got short-term stations, temporary station, a movable trailer, maybe a mobile platform. People who have a van or a car or something. Depends on what they have access to. Sometimes these sensor networks are close to like the federal, location monitoring location, an FEM or FRM, EPA or state agency network, although not always. And obviously things nowadays you're seeing in different cities and stuff like that, wearable sensors. People want those small sensors available to them. And so, again, the small sensors are really appealing to a lot of community members. Obviously, they're low cost. They don't cost as much. You can therefore have 5, 10 of them for the cost that you would have one point analyzer. So that's cool. It's more monitoring locations. You get greater spatial coverage. Another benefit is, there's no need for technical expertise. You don't need a certified field technician or a scientist to be able to help you interpret the data. It's out there. Just more data are collected, I should say. You don't need one to help collect the data. For interpretation, you do. So it seems like there's a lot of positives in just, all right, well, if the communities are interested, let's just let them do their low cost sensor stuff. But from our perspective, there's obviously a lot of drawbacks that seem kind of evident in doing a low cost sensor network solely. You're sacrificing your data quality. They're cheaper because it's just not as reliable of an instrument, maybe not as sensitive. That's inherent. One of the downsides of that is that compounds that people are interested in terms of air toxics that an industrial facility may release are not necessarily measured by small sensors. So it's like, cool, you can do PM, you could maybe do NO2, some small sensors for methane, but you're not really getting to those toxic VOCs, the hydrocarbons, the other things that people are interested in. So, it's kind of a limitation of low cost sensors. And so when that happens, you kind of get maybe a limited picture of what's going on. You're going to get a more biased interpretation of what's happening. And ultimately the questions that the public, the communities are interested in are not going to be able to be adequately addressed. And so, what does that mean for facilities as well? It's like, well, folks have really put a lot of their effort into getting a low cost sensor. It's great. We've got data. You can display it in real time. Seems great. But, what about that quality? Once that information is out there, regardless of the quality, a narrative has been created. Right, a refinery is, or some kind of a landfill, some kind of industrial site is being pointed out as a bad guy, and it can be hard to change public perception at times. So you get more scrutiny for these different facilities, and they have to try to scramble to answer questions. And again, it leads to what I was talking about, some more of those adversarial interactions, some more of those like lawsuits, things that you want to try to avoid. And so what we have, kind of learned in the last few years, and again, some of this is regulatorily driven, but there are key components that can really help lead to a well-designed community-focused system. And so, doing a combination of high precision and low-cost sensors is really beneficial. Kind of helps balance that the need for good spatial coverage while also maintaining the highest quality data. That are maybe defensible. You could say we stand by these data, we know that they're good. A good community-focused monitoring plan from a facility, again, not just doing the bare minimum necessarily of what's in the legislation, but how much more can you engage the community? Can you create an advisory committee that's made up of community members, maybe some elected officials, some kind of local agency representatives. Again, I'll talk about the Torrance project, how we were able to do this. To really get some feedback, to not leave them out of the process. It's like, okay, a lot of these regulations are focused at these communities. how can we help meet, their needs? And it could be informal meetings. I've seen some of the refineries I know that we work with have kind of periodic meetings with the local community just to hear them out and see what's happening. We found that also like outreach and educational programs are really, a good tool you can utilize as well, whether they're school age educational programs or kind of just community focused in general. Again, I'll give a little example of that in a second. Obviously, a lot of the from a regulatory perspective, the information needs to be made available to the public. So, that's in the form of a website. Well, you need to, what we've seen is obviously your website needs to be of good quality, kind of readable. We've done situations where we're developing websites where we have focus committees to come in and just make sure that you can navigate. Does the website make sense, right? Is it user friendly? We have utilized a couple different things depending on, some of the refinery clients we've worked with, putting some resources out there. Here are frequently asked questions. Here are some resources like Air Quality 101, kind of distribute some of that information to educate folks as well, because if they understand the context a little bit more, that's obviously best, other than just getting a summary report, which could be a little bit more technical. You want to add on top of that as well. And we've seen in some situations there's like community hotlines you can call in or emails that you can, ask questions as well to the refineries directly, see what's going on. By giving honest, I think STI, Sonoma Tech, we've really worked hard in the last few years to make sure that we, are selecting technology that's really of good quality, that's properly designed, that's going to be reliable, not just the equipment and the instrumentation, but the data sharing platforms. We put a lot of effort to maintaining our data management system and our websites. Anytime something's happening, we have a website that says, hey, we're doing maintenance, or we know this is wrong, or any kind of information. You can put that all on the website, and at least people know that that's something there, and they can get that kind of information. So all these are really kind of great components for kind of leading to a successful kind of fence line monitoring system, or something that's going to be community focused. And I didn't put it down here, but what that also allows facilities to do is now a little bit more. That helps you run your site a little bit more efficiently, right? So if we've got continuous monitoring and we know there's a release somewhere, we see it in the concentration, that helps the facility, pinpoint kind of where it is, right? All right, well, it looks like we've picked it up on this, in this path. What source is that near? Can we send somebody out there, do kind of leak detection? Is there something wrong with that kind of a piece of equipment within the refinery? And so those kind of things happen a lot. We work closely with the refineries to give them that information internally, as well as in addition to what's out there available on the public website. We provide a little bit more information to folks internally to use on their sites. And ultimately, what does that do? If once a company is involved in helping establish a monitoring network, there's a lot of benefits to that, right? Like I was talking about, you have a more predictable form of engagement. Instead of all your interactions being, we're angry at you, we want to sue, it could be, okay, well, at least we know where this is coming from. We have website feedback forms, we have hotlines, like things where you can get the information in kind of a predictable way. Like I said before, it kind of provides an objective and a defensible basis, right? So that's really awesome in a way that can help manage expectations, right? A lot of people think this facility is producing XYZ. I know they're killing me. If you put the data out there and you trust and you know that it's of good quality, you can say, well, actually, it's probably not that facility. And I'll show an example. One of our monitoring sites, that seems to have actually been the case. And ultimately, all you want to do is provide that insurance and that transparency that folks are clamoring for, and it really does help build that trust. So, but the time I have, I don't want to take up too much time. Since I got a few minutes, so I'll just run through a couple of case studies, a couple of examples where we did this type of work. So the biggest project we worked on is the Torrance Air project. So it's available, project still online, torranceair.org. So that was selected as a supplemental environmental project back in 2017. Because it came out in 2000, or we, were approved for this in 2017, it kind of preceded some of the Rule 1180 requirements just a bit. Rule 1180 language didn't really get fully developed until December of 2017. And I say that because I think you could argue there are parts of 1180 that have not been hashed out a year and a half into the being live with the data. So it's a little bit of a moving target, but we tried our best to kind of anticipate a lot of those components. Obviously, the fence line and community parts, the real-time data access via website, and the notification system. And so you can see just an image of our website, our homepage. We've got kind of that notification system sign up like right on the homepage when you get there. So what was really unique in this situation, I was like, okay, well, like, how do we do this? Obviously it's a supplemental environmental project. It's geared towards the community. What kind of steps can we take to get them the information that they need? So we set up a community advisory committee that was made up of a whole bunch of folks locally in Torrance, including HOA leaders, right? People who live in the city, officials, advisors to a local congressperson, school district officials, some of the community groups as well, advocacy groups, as well as local business owners. And we kind of had them sit on a committee to kind of give us input on all kinds of facets of the project. Not so much the technical side, we picked the instrumentation, but you're like, all right, how do you want it displayed? What do you want to see on the website? What's the branding? All that kind of engagement plan and stuff like that. So it's a really useful input for the project. So overall, it's a 2-year monitoring project. It's a combination of what I'm talking about, these high precision instruments that are open path and points. So you can see kind of on the map here, it's the outline of the refinery. We've got our open path systems along the northern edge of the fence line, as well as community sites really pretty close to the area. So we use those trailers that I pointed out are set up in these 3 locations. In addition to the high precision instrumentation, we also distributed 25 low-cost PM sensors to community members. Signed them up. All right, who wants it? We picked them at random, and 25 residents were selected, and their data are also streamed on the website as well. So they get both facets of that on the website. One of the other things we've done as well, I talked a little bit about outreach. STI has developed a curriculum, school curriculum for middle school and high school students called Kids Making Sense. That really helps teach the fundamentals of air quality or air pollution science, and it does a lot of handheld activities. There's like a small sensor that's associated with it, and we're trying to set this up in Torrance and areas near the refinery to help get that kind of education for younger folks as well, so they understand what's out there. So far, we've done about 1.5 years of monitoring. For the most part, it's been fairly successful, certainly in terms of data dissemination and what we think we've been able to do. For us as kind of an independent company, we've been able to work with all facets of it, right? We've worked with the refinery, we've worked with the local AQMD folks, community members to kind of get all that information out there for them. And like I said, the biggest thing is kind of keeping that transparency. So we're still actively involved with the community. We had an issue with one of our sensors. People weren't believing the data. We had a meeting out there and we talked with folks. We explained all the technical things that maybe have gone wrong, give them solutions. That's what they want. And like I said before, the website will continue to display anytime we know that there are data interruptions. So it's definitely a pretty involved project, but for the most part, I think most people are appreciative of the amount of information that's out there. I'll just give one more in the interest of time, one more example here. So we've got Sunshine Canyon Landfill project that we've been operating as well for the last about 13, 14 years, also in the LA basin. Was it the city of LA or county of LA that city of Los Angeles established that one as a requirement? They wanted monitoring in this landfill. Folks in the nearby community were complaining about the landfill. So for the last 13, 14 years, we've been doing measurements of particulate matter, black carbon, wind, trying to get some information. We're using regulatory instrumentation. We're providing the data annually to the community, and that also has an advisory committee and public meetings that are happening very often. And I wanted to give an example of a situation where the community is sure that the landfill is causing all the pollution that they're seeing, right? Anytime there's diesel or something else, it must be coming from the landfill. Well, here's an example of kind of the image of the report we submit, kind of a readable, easy to digest kind of infographic format. And I think it's important to highlight that this last year, we really have, after looking at data, 13 years worth of data, really decided that the air pollution really doesn't seem to be coming from the nearby landfill the way people think it is. You know, this is I-5 corridor, especially busy. You know, high commute area. It kind of links the Central Valley to LA, so it's constantly busy. Many highways here, and it turns out it's more like the diesel from trucks and other sources that is actually really leading the charge there. So a little bit more of those data managing expectations, like I talked about, is really a benefit to being like, well, I've got data that I believe in that I can then draw this conclusion. It isn't just what the community advocacy groups think. And STI is the kind of company that, you know, we stand by our data analysis, and we'll put the truth out there, even if communities don't necessarily agree with it. So anyway, I'll skip the last example because I think I'm running out of time here. With that said, I'll take any questions if you guys have them. So thanks for your time.